The Boston Bruins are off to an encouraging start under their new head coach. Ian McLaren of Locked On Bruins joins us to discuss that and what the keys are for success the rest of the season. All that and more next on today's Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Bruins, Ian McLaren. And Ian, interesting time right now for the Bruins. They get off to a sluggish start. They make a coaching change, and they seem to be winning a little bit now since the change. What has been the biggest difference under the new regime?
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't seen a huge difference, obviously. I kind of describe it as baby steps, not necessarily a moon landing giant step for hockey here, but there's been some small improvements to be sure. The key to the two victories that the Bruins have had under Joe Sacco, they've been against teams that are not necessarily powerhouses in the NHL. That helps Utah and Detroit, although Utah beat Pittsburgh pretty good over the weekend as well. But the key has been special teams so far. They've scored a couple of power play goals, which they still remain dead last in the NHL in that category. And they've also been perfect on the penalty kill under Joe Sacco as well. So the special teams have really been a big improvement. Small sample size, of course, but the Bruins had also been the most penalized team so far in the regular season. So the fact that they've been able to kill 100% of the penalties that they have taken, which is fewer on average than they had been collecting under Jim Montgomery, scoring a couple goals on the power play, which is huge. And also they've been getting pretty good goaltending from both Eunice Korpisalo, who had a shutout in the first game under head coach Joe Sacco, and Jeremy Swayman, who has struggled so far this season. He had a pretty good performance Saturday in Detroit. So they're not exactly coming out guns blazing under Joe Sacco. They've only scored 3 goals in 2 games, but they've only allowed 1. So improving that almost conference low goal differential that they had under Jim Montgomery. So yeah, baby steps in the right direction for sure.
What is Sacco saying that he plans to do differently than Montgomery had?
A couple things, I think. One of them is that Jim Montgomery, he was a big proponent of kind of shot quality over shot volume. Joe Sacco is preaching more of a north-south game, so really just trying to get the puck on net as much as possible, which the Bruins, frankly, really needed. They were sometimes hesitant or trying to set up nice plays instead of just getting the puck on net, which we know, especially in today's NHL, where I think last I saw the league average for goaltending is under 900 at the moment. So the more you get the puck on net, the greater chance it has of going in. It's just pretty simple. So that's one thing. And also, just simplifying the game as a whole, not trying to do too much, not overthinking it, helping players kind of rely more on their instincts than trying to have to adapt to this perfect way of playing hockey. Really, they kind of just had to tear it down to the fundamentals right now because this team's confidence was pretty shot after the first 20 games. A whole lot of circumstances had converged to result in this bad start heading back into training camp and also back to the offseason where they traded Linus Ullmark. So really trying to simplify things and help the new faces kind of find their feet as well as members of the Boston Bruins. And we've seen Elias Lindholm play maybe his best game as a Bruin in the win over Utah. And then Nikita Zadorov, who's really struggled as a Bruin, stepped up huge in locking things down in Detroit in their second win. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come with those new faces.
Montgomery hired today by the St. Louis Blues to be their new coach. Your thoughts on that and what he will bring to the table in St. Louis?
Yeah, it kind of continues a trend for the Bruins. Each of the three head coaches fired by Don Sweeney, all of whom were Jack Adams winners, scooped up very quickly, especially now Bruce Cassidy, of course, hired, I think it was in 6 days by Vegas. Jim Montgomery now only took 5 days to find a new job. And we did hear from general manager Don Sweeney that the Bruins did have extension talks with Montgomery that didn't really go that far. And we kind of get the sense now that maybe this is what Jim Montgomery was looking at long-term. After all, he was a assistant coach in St. Louis before being hired by the Bruins, still has a home there in the off season. And maybe that's kind of where he wanted to be back, and it just wasn't a fit with the Bruins, regardless of whether or not they got off to a hot start. Sure, if they had come out really hot and then they went up to win the Stanley Cup this season, obviously it's a no-brainer that he would stick around. But yeah, he's back home in St. Louis, joins Claude Julien, who's an assistant coach in St. Louis. And, good for him. He's a great man. He's had a lot of ups and downs in his life and his hockey career. And hopefully he's found a home here for the next little while. It's well-deserved. He's a good coach. It isn't solely on him, of course, that the Bruins are off to this start. And it's not as if, they've been amazing under Joe Sacco, but it has been some steps in the right direction for this team.
Talk to me a little bit about Jeremy Swayman. His numbers are not where most people expected them to be. Is the pressure of being the number one guy at the start of this season one of the factors, or is there something else going on here?
I don't know if that's fully it. We've seen him in the past be pretty unflappable in net. It doesn't seem as though the pressure really comes down on him in a way that affects his performance that much. I think it's more kind of a mental thing. He had the long stalemate contract wise with the Bruins that caused him to miss all of training camp. So obviously that is probably a bigger part of it than anything, just not having those reps in training camp, no exhibition games, kind of hitting the ground running. And I don't think you can discount either the kind of the human side of the game. He and Linus Ullmark were incredibly tight. And the fact that they went from, basically being together, not 24/7, but pretty much closer than family at some points during the season. And the fact that that relationship has now been disturbed and they're in separate places. You see Linus Ullmark in Ottawa, also struggling. It's a big factor for sure to have that relationship kind of separated and to have to go through a whole new routine with a whole different guy in Eunice Korpisalo. I think that's part of it as well. So A, on the hockey side, missing training camp, B, kind of that personal side and moving on without someone that you had been so comfortable with over the past few seasons. But we saw him play pretty well in Detroit. And again, hopefully that's a sign of things to come for Jeremy Swayman, who everybody knows can be one of the better goaltenders in the NHL for sure.
Real quick, the power play, as you mentioned, dead last in the league. What's wrong? Because there's talent there.
Yeah, it's really confusing because there is, especially in the first unit, a lot of talent there. Before Hampus Lindholm got injured, they had tried putting him on the top power play unit because with all the talent Charlie McAvoy has, perhaps that's not really his area of strength. They have found success the past couple of games by putting Brad Marchand at the front of the net. You don't really think of him as a net front presence, but he's really shifty and helped set up a goal by Elias Lindholm. Tyler Johnson came in and got an assist on the power play goal in Detroit. So, yeah, again, it's just kind of simplifying things, getting pucks on net. The power play should be better than it is, but at the same time, the Bruins don't have some of the same weapons they used to in James Van Riemsdyk. He helped the power play last year. Jake DeBrusk certainly was a force on the power play. He had a big game for Vancouver in Ottawa over the weekend, and the Canucks will be in Boston this week, which should be interesting. So while they have kind of the high level talent on the first unit, the second unit not as strong as it used to be, and that's probably a reason why it's been struggling as well.
Ian, I know it's going to be interesting in Boston going forward. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, Locked NHL Bruins on social media. People can find me at Ian C. McLaren, and the podcast free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube every day.
All right, Ian, thanks so much.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And hockey fans, use your knowledge of your favorite team and the game of hockey to get exciting bets on FanDuel as well. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.